Hello and welcome to episode 6 of Cooler Heads, a podcast from myself, Rabbi Scott Hausman Weiss, and George Schwartz. We have gathered over the last few months some of these episodes with some of y'all and some just the two of us to discuss issues that are topical, specifically related to Israel, the conflicts throughout the Middle East, and as it's aptly titled, Cooler Heads, because we do believe that cooler heads should prevail. Whether they will prevail is another story, but they should prevail. And we're putting it out there that we need to present these options. So, George, I'm really happy to be back with you for this next episode.
I am too. It's a real pleasure to be generating content. And unlike most episodes, this one we're not talking about something that's ripped from the headlines. Today we're going to be talking about more general principles. So,
Hmm.
the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and some innovative ideas for how to shake loose what many consider to be one of the most infamous diplomatic deadlocks of our time.
Right. So, what is really one of the challenges is that with the issue of the two state solution or one state issue or the conflict in the Middle East or all these different terms is that oftentimes we end up doing the same dances. We end up getting involved in arguments about the beginning of the state or who was marginalized and who was centralized and all these different issues, which, well, at least you and I aren't going to solve in this moment. We have our thoughts, we have our ideas, we believe that we have our data points, but more importantly, we can see that there are some major issues, major challenges, major problems that need to be addressed. And so, as George mentioned, we're going to talk today about some innovative approaches that we have heard about, read about, researched. And the first one is a term that many of you probably have never heard before. It's a term that is the Palestinian Emirates. So, George, fill us in. What is this really referring to?
So, first of all, that was a fantastic introduction. For a little bit of history of how I kind of came to the conclusion of like, hey, let's talk about this issue. Let's hash this out a little bit. What I noticed was that our enemies have specific goals that they are working towards. So the destruction of the state of Israel, and they have intermediate objectives to work towards that goal, such as the right of return of Palestinians to be that demographic bomb to destroy Israel from within. And we are seeing our enemies gain traction. And then I looked at what you and I have been advocating for, and what the positions that I myself have taken. I'm opposed to a Palestinian state because I think that there's no plausible scenario in which a Palestinian state doesn't immediately turn into an ISIS-like terror state that is warped around just making trouble for its neighbors. Why do I think that? Because that's what Palestinian civil society has degenerated into. I'm against the right of return because that is quite explicitly just an effort to destroy the Jewish character of the state of Israel from the inside out. On the other side, I'm opposed to the annexation of the West Bank. I,
Mhm.
I do not think that is a good solution for anybody. Because think about it. If you annex the West Bank, what are your options? Well, you could expel the Palestinians, but besides being a moral outrage, that the Jordanians would probably consider that an act of war. And
Mhm.
peace with Jordan is worth far more than that strip of land. Alternatively, you could keep the Palestinians in their sort of occupied second class in their occupied status, but
And that's a
then you're
recipe for
maintaining them
disaster.
class. Absolutely. That makes the apartheid lie true.
Right.
Alternatively, you could induct them all as Israeli citizens, which is even more of a disaster. Now you're taking an enemy population in, you're bringing a snake into your house. Terrible idea. So then I got to thinking like, okay, these are all things that I'm against. And what we're arguing for here is basically just maintaining the status quo. But the status quo, if we, as we've seen, isn't comfortable and it may not even be tenable. So what about giving people something to be in favor of? What about giving people an idea to work towards, something that is actually accomplishable, that might actually result in long-term peace for both sides? Well, I stumbled across an op-ed in Wall Street Journal a few months ago that focused extensively on a Palestinian sheikh in Judean Samaria named Al-Jabari. So I'll refer to him as Sheikh Al-Jabari from here on out. And years before October, Sheikh Jabari had been saying, look, I don't like the Palestinian Authority. They harass my family, but I get along very well with the settlers in my area. So
Hmm.
here's what I propose. I want to be recognized as the emir of my tribe's lands in Hebron. And in exchange for that, I am ready to enter the Abraham Accords right now.
Mm.
And this is an idea that has actually gained some traction in Israeli settler circles and in Israeli academic circles. I
So
can't
let me
speak
stop
to
you there
how.
for just a second,
Yeah,
George. So explain why that is a nuclear idea, meaning how the notion. You said a couple of things here that I think are really important. First of all, the notion that what this term emir suggests, this idea that the emir is in direct talks with Israeli settlers. And there's a sense of we could make peace this way. So help us understand those pieces before you go on with the more
yeah,
details.
for sure. So emir is an Arabic term meaning prince. And so to set this guy up as the emir of this land means that he is the sovereign of this land. I would
Right.
link this back to older Arab government structures, like predating even our conception of the nation state. And these are government structures that you'll still see in Arab countries today. Um, Tribal links and being under the command of the sheikh is maybe a little bit weaker in the city, but when you get out into rural areas, the sort of feudal power that is wielded by the sheikhs is quite real. This is something that I observed firsthand when I was on my first Iraq deployment back in 2008, 2009. So recognizing Sheikh Jabari as the emir of his lands is basically making him the head of state of like the city state of Hebron. I found it very interesting that Sheikh, we hear in the news about all these terrible things having to do with clashes between Israeli settlers and Palestinians. And I'll also add that I deplore settler violence against Palestinians and will make no effort to excuse that. But that's not how it is everywhere. In some places, Hebron, for example, you have Palestinians who actually get on well with the settlers in the area. Um, so now you mentioned like how is this a nuclear idea? Well, it is quite revolutionary, and here's why. The Oslo Accords. I was in like third or fourth grade when the Oslo Accords were signed. And so even yeah, I
I
know.
was in I was in my first year of rabbinical school, but okay.
And so, but even at the time, the 9-year-old George was politically conscious enough to understand that this was a momentous event and it was a potential opportunity to resolve this conflict and make Israel safe in the long run. Now, the Oslo Accord, unfortunately, has proved out to be kind of a devil's bargain, wherein the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, a terrorist group, purported that they wanted to go legit. They morphed into the Palestinian Authority, and in exchange for that, Israel and the rest of the world recognized them as the sole legitimate
Right.
speaker on behalf of the will of the Palestinian people. So really, it was a tremendous victory and end run for the PLO over its Palestinian rivals, and also they kind of put one over on the Israelis. Um, to transition away from that, to say like, hey, we are no longer recognizing the Palestinian Authority as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. Rather, we are going to maintain bilateral relations with this guy who is running his tribal lands that basically blows up the Oslo Accords. Now, maybe that's not as bad as it sounds because the Oslo Accords have been kind of a poison pill. It's been the so-called peace process has been a lot of process, but it hasn't really resulted in peace. The Palestinian Authority, notoriously corrupt, illegitimate, even among most Palestinian people. What Sheikh Jabari has liked to say is, look, the Palestinian Authority promised us peace, sovereignty, and prosperity, and they've delivered none of those things.
Mhm.
Let us chart our own path. Now, if Sheikh Jabari is out there, I would wager there are other Palestinian factions as well who are willing to make a separate peace with Israel.
Well, we know, for example, Abu Shabab,
Yep,
right,
Abu
in
Shabab.
Gaza,
Yep,
right?
in Rafah.
Abu
Yeah.
Shabab, right, and this is a I mean, we could call him an emir, but potentially head of a clan, head of an area that they have kept secure. It's in the southern part of Gaza that is under quote unquote Hamas control, but it's not under Hamas control, right? And they very much, and I think what's really crucial about this is for people to understand there are Palestinians who not only don't want to live under the power of Hamas, but have succeeded at keeping Hamas at bay.
Yep.
Imagine for a moment if there was just a little bit of support. Now, I know Israel already provides some support to these groups, in Gaza, and that is a crucial piece. But if there was international support, if this was seen as a potential solution, right? I mean, it's clear that I mean, it's good that Israel has that major buffer in Gaza today, post October 7th, post the Gaza war, because of the need to maintain that buffer. But again, just like maintaining control over millions of Palestinians in the West Bank, Israel doesn't want to be doing this. One of the crucial pieces, George, that I want to bring up that I think is super important in all of this, because sometimes we get in trouble because those who accuse us of the worst crimes, those who accuse, when I say us, I mean the Jewish people, because unfortunately, our enemies are not making a distinction between Israelis and the Jewish people. So I don't think I need to either. But the accusation is we want to do as badly to the Palestinians as, at least, I'm not going to say all Palestinians, but as Hamas or Fatah or Islamic Jihad wants to do to the Jews. And the truth of the matter is, Israel, even its most right-wing conservative group, not the most right-wing, but within reason, because there's always exceptions to the rule.
The mainstream is really right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Israel doesn't want to control Lebanon, doesn't want to control Beirut, doesn't want to expand its territory like that. Israel would be thrilled if there could be a peace on its borders. And it would be, I mean, as Haviv Retagora was just recently saying, Israel wants to be able to send Jews to the northern part of Lebanon, to send them to go skiing. There are Israeli tour agents who want to work with Lebanese tour agents to make that possible, right? They want there to be southern, Sinai Desert and beyond areas that can be built up and work together. But Israel doesn't need to control that land, right? So one of the things that what we're trying to offer is some different ways of understanding what could be possible. Not that you or I are, being asked to come to Camp David to be a part of any kind of negotiations, right? But we wanted people to know that there is room for imagination, for creativity, right? Because Israel doesn't want to be in control of all these
No.
people.
But this is why we're doing this podcast, because like you never know who's listening. You know,
Okay, true.
nobody's going to call you or me to like go out to Camp David and present this idea for the Palestinian Emirates. But if we get enough people thinking about this idea
Yes.
and doing their own research on it and actually coming up with ways that might make this feasible
Hmm.
and talking about it, maybe we can build some positive momentum for an idea that might shake something loose in this conflict. In Gaza, there are promising signs. You know, you mentioned Abu Shabab. There's also Al Amstal and his people in Khan Yunis who are fighting
Hmm.
back very hard against
Right,
Hamas.
right.
A few months ago, Abu Shabab posted on his, I think it was his X account, an image of two hands shaking in front of an Israeli and a Palestinian flag with the caption "Peace, Shalom, Salam."
Mm,
So he's clearly trying to send a message to position
absolutely.
himself as a viable partner. So I think that this it's definitely worth exploring. To so imagine if instead of negotiating with a single Palestinian authority, rather, Israel maintained bilateral relations with a patchwork of Palestinian factions and treated them just as if they were sovereign states. You survey out the borders and say, hey, we will not encroach on this. If like one of our people comes into your land without your permission, arrest him and extradite him to us because that's not acceptable.
Right.
But in the meantime, this territorial conflict is settled. You are not refugees. You are home. You have a land, and this is it.
Right. Well, we want to give people, we want people to have the same rights that we have, right? We want people to be able to have access to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We want people to pursue things, to plant a vineyard and sit under the under the tree and all that. Um, and we've got to be thinking in ways that are beyond what is the sort of regular set table. Now, just as a quick note, I look into sometimes our so Cooler Heads, by the way, is actually part of it's posted under a podcast channel called Conversations with the Rabbi. At some point, maybe we need to have a Cooler Heads channel, but that's something else we can talk about another time. But I mention this because in SoundCloud, which is where we post this, and then it goes to iTunes, and then we also post it to YouTube. It shows me like where it's being listened to. And one of the three more common areas that it's being listened to on a regular basis, believe it or not, is in Ho Chi Minh City. Now, I don't
Ah,
know who's in Ho Chi Minh City listening to this rabbi's blogs or our podcasts, but I'm saying this publicly to anyone. If you're listening in Ho Chi Minh City, would you let us know? Shoot me a message. You can reach me through the channel. I'd love to know who is in Ho Chi Minh City because it's not just a couple of listens; it's like a third of the listens. And maybe and look, and I recognize it. Maybe it's a some issue, some weird thing within the demographics. I
a
don't know.
VPN, maybe. Who
Yeah,
knows?
yeah, who
Yeah.
knows? But it's yeah, it could be somebody's VPN. That's true. That's true. But wouldn't it be funny if there was somebody listening avidly in Ho Chi Minh City? Anyway,
You never know who's listening.
right, right. So now I want to bring up another issue. It's another perspective, another different view on this issue. So, George, as you know, Israel is moving towards elections. Now, elections have to take place in Israel by in October. I think maybe it's October 6th. I'm not sure. I'm not remembering the date exactly, but it's October. Now, they can be called early because it's a parliamentary election, but there doesn't seem to be any rationale why Prime Minister Netanyahu or his coalition would call an early election. It could happen, but it's probably doubtful. So parties are beginning to form, alliances are beginning to form. We recently just heard about um, uh, uh, um, Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, who were the partners in the former they call it not they didn't call it a unity government, broad coalition government, as I think is what it was
Well,
called.
yeah, the coalition government. Yeah.
The coalition. I mean, they're always coalition government, but this was a very broad one because it
Yes.
included, for example, the Ram
The
Party,
opposition.
which the
Yeah.
Arab Party, and Likud. Um, and so we're beginning to see some major challenges coming down the pike to Netanyahu. But in the mix of all this is a brand new party called the Oz Party. So Oz means strength in Hebrew. And the Oz Party has been formed and is being led by a really pretty brilliant woman named Einat Wilf. Einat Wilf is a former member of Knesset, and she kind of describes herself as a reformed peacenik, meaning she still very much believes in peace, but she also is bringing a platform that's quite unique, quite interesting. Now, I know, George, you've read up on it a little bit. Do you want to give us just a little bit more about it, and then I can fill in as well?
Well, certainly. So, one of the big elements of her platform is rejection of what she terms Palestinianism,
Right.
which, if you look at the history of the term Palestinian prior to 1964, it generally referred to the Jews who
Right.
lived in the area of what was called Mandatory Palestine. It wasn't
Well, I
until
think I think it's important to know not just the Jews. Jews use that term most often for themselves, but if you lived in Palestine, right, you could. I mean, if you lived in that area, you lived in Palestine. Now,
yep,
right, whether they called themselves a Palestinian is another story, right? But go on.
yeah, the Arabs who
Yeah.
live there generally call themselves Palestinian Arabs.
Arabs, right? Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Post 1964 and definitely post the 1967 war, Palestinian came to refer to the Palestinian and Arabs, and it was a counter identity, really, because ethnically, culturally, the Palestinians, as they were now called, were no different from Arabs in the surrounding country, Egyptians, Jordans, and so the Palestinian nationalism is kind of a fabrication meant to delegitimize the state of Israel. So, in rejecting Palestinianism, Einat Wilf's idea is to reject the involvement of UNRWA, which, as we've discussed before, is really just perpetuating the conflict by keeping the Palestinians in stateless immiseration and telling the Palestinians, like, look, once we draw a line, that's it. You are no longer refugees. You have no right of return. You have a state, and that will be that. Um, now,
Now, let me just add something, because
yeah,
those of you, there may be some of you who are listening to this thinking, this is ruthless, this is mean, this is not kind. What do you mean they shouldn't have any kind of sense of right of return? So I just want to just touch on that just very briefly to remind everybody. George and I would both agree that in an ideal world, no one loses their home as a result of war. No one is thrown out or forced to leave their home, their land, their country. I mean, that is not a world that we want to live in. No, that is most unfortunately, it is the reality of much of the 20th century, and in particular, the world post World War II. So, just as a quick reminder to everybody, 10 million refugees, 10 million individuals lost their homes during World War II. Post World War II, within 10 years, and I think it might have even been less, all 10 million were resettled. They weren't able to return to their homes. Most of them were not, but they were resettled. And it's, I guess how we call it, unfair across the board. right? Or it was fairly unfair, or however you want to describe it. It was the reality. And then there was, as George reminded us of, the UNRWA, UNRWA, which was the separate organization created just for the Palestinian refugees. And their uniqueness was recognized as they, unlike every other refugee that had ever existed, at least in the 20th century, they would maintain their refugee status forever, or at least until there was a return to their home. But a return to their home meant the uh, undoing of the Jewish state, which had been voted upon and approved by the United Nations. So it's one of these things of like the what do they call it, the unstoppable force against the immovable wall. At some point one of them's going to have to give, because you can't have both in existence. And so what George is alluding to, referring to, is that this Palestinianism is built upon it's built upon an impossible goal. And if it wasn't impossible 50 years ago, it's really impossible today, because there's about 10 million people who live in Israel proper, 8 million of whom are Jews. There are 9 million people today who, according to the UNRWA rules, can claim Palestinian legacy and therefore right of return. And so you have an existence of 10 million people in the land, or let's forget the 10 million, just 8 million, 8 million Jews in the land, and 9 million Palestinians. So what are we really talking about? Because no one really believes that the Jews are going to just give up and walk out and move. Where are they going to go? So I just wanted to give a little bit more background to remind people about um, the fodder that produces and continues the Palestinianism.
Yeah, for sure. For those interested in doing further reading on the subject from the Arab perspective, I'd strongly recommend The Arab Case for Israel by Hussein Abu Hussein,
Right.
in which he explores the idea of the right of return, and he gives pretty powerful arguments for just the sheer impossibility of the idea. I mean, the places that these people are trying to return to, in many cases, no longer exist, or there's somebody else living there. So what are you going to do? Deport them to somewhere else? So, or you might have, so UNRWA math is basically based around multiplying the number of refugees. The UN High Commission for Refugees, UNHCR, has actually decreased the number of world refugees. UNRWA is focused on multiplying them, on broadening the application of that term refugee to this category of Palestinians in a way that doesn't exist for any other kind of refugee. So as a result, you have the grandchildren, the great grandchildren of people who were displaced during the 1947-48 war, who are claiming like, oh yeah, I've never been to Palestine, but I'm Palestinian. I have the right to go back there. Well, okay, there are 10 other grandkids of that single guy who was displaced. Do all of you and your extended families now have claim to that same house? How's that going to work? Anyway,
right. So right.
For
So
those of you interested in reading up, yeah.
yeah. So what Anat Wilf
Now,
brings us is this. Let's talk about Anat Wilf. Yeah. Go ahead.
yes, back to others, yeah.
Right.
So what Wilf is proposing is to just to draw a border unilaterally if necessary. Stop working with UNRWA, which the Israeli government has made strides in that direction, and just say like, look, this is the border. Go on that side of it. Try to draw the border in such a way that most Jewish majority communities come on the Israeli side. Palestinians who are on the Israeli side of the line have the option to stay and naturalize or go to Palestinian ruled lands, but that ends it. Like no more right of return, no more efforts to destroy the state of Israel. Just accept the fact that the Jewish Zionist state exists.
And what's powerful about this, and why Einat Wilf is not necessarily very popular amongst many, certainly Israeli politicians, is that she's really trying to push the state of Israel to literally draw a line, to say, and this it aligns very well with no annexation. Now, it depends on what side of the line you're on about whether or not someone's going to call it annexation or not annexation. At some point, if you have the green line and you're beyond the green line, well, the reality is many of Israel's enemies won't even condone Israel to the west of the green line, but that's a whole nother story. But wherever Israel draws that line, obviously there's going to be controversy. But what Einat Wilf is trying to do is she's trying to say Israel needs to take ownership finally. It needs to, yes, the world is standing in the way of Israel having a border, but the reality is Israel is strong enough and powerful enough, has a history long enough to be able to say, here's the border. Here is where our country ends and whatever else begins. And we will take responsibility, ownership, sovereignty, even to the extent, and this is something that is still actually it would still be in discussion, but it would stand to reason that Palestinians within this land would be potentially given the option of becoming naturalized citizens of Israel. And I believe that as long as they are not known criminals, that Israel would be willing to do that. And wouldn't it be it'd be amazing if in 2026 Israel recognized and made these individuals naturalized citizens. Now they'd also have to figure out how to do that for the Palestinians that live in East Jerusalem, and that's a whole nother story. But this is one of those things of Israel could step in and take ownership and give ownership, and it would be a powerful thing. So this idea, I think it's got it should have a lot of purchase in the world, and could really go so far in Israel proving its point, right? Really saying, we really mean what we say. We're not trying to become we're not trying to control Amman or Lebanon or Beirut or I'm blanking on
Damascus,
Syria.
Cairo,
Damascus.
whichever.
Thank you. Yeah, exactly. There's another thing that I want to bring up that I think the Oz party does that I think is really important, and this is about inside of Israel. Now, George, you and I are very familiar with, and it is a painful topic, that there are two main groups in Israel who have historically not served in the Israel Defense Forces. One is Arabs, who have been allowed but not encouraged and not required. But then there have been the Orthodox, the ultra-Orthodox, who have been given an exemption from the very start of the State of Israel. Now, we know how this happened. We know because Prime Minister Ben-Gurion really believed that they were dying out. And he just thought, let them die out. He really thought that the modern State of Israel was going to take over from, the very, very hardcore religious. Now, obviously, Ben-Gurion was not correct.
Yeah.
Right. So what Einat Wilf is suggesting is this actually might be the more difficult piece of her platform. I think drawing a border, which seems almost impossible,
Relatively
is
easy
easier.
compared to ending the Haredi exemption. Yeah.
Right. So what she is suggesting is, and it's not just about the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox. She's saying if you are a citizen of the State of Israel, which everyone should be who are within these borders, men and women, Arab, Israeli, Jew, Christian, Muslim, all of whom are people who live within these borders, everyone at 18 goes to the office of the army. You enlist. That doesn't mean that everyone is a soldier by any means, but that everyone is engaged in national service of one kind or another. And she wants to level the playing field. And then she goes farther. And this is like chutzpah. She says, it's in her platform. You can look it up. If you look up the party platform Oz, O-Z, it's all online. She says, no public support without public service. And so she says, Israel's it has so many social services. No one has to have, some people have private insurance, but most people don't, right? There's so much access to healthcare, education, um, schooling, opportunities for job development, etc. All these things are either heavily subsidized or provided as part of your citizenship. She says, if you don't do it, okay, it's fine. But then you don't actually have access to these services or these subsidized services. So we're not going to kick you out. We're not going to force you at the end of a gun to serve or to volunteer. And we'll welcome you and we'll protect you even. But we're not going to allow you to participate in the social services, social network, and receive those opportunities.
Israel offers a lot in terms of social services, especially by our American standard.
Oh,
and
yeah.
so I think that that's pretty fair to say much is given, but much should be expected.
Mm-hmm.
One of the more heartwarming aspects of the IDF, from my perspective, is there is some strong participation from the Arab Israelis. So the Bedouins,
Yes.
for example, have their very own recon unit, so that the IDF can take advantage of their unique background and their intimate familiarity with the border regions of the desert. And that recon unit is one of the more respected units in the IDF.
And don't forget the Druze.
Yeah, yeah, the Druze as well. They're renowned as some of the fiercest Israeli fighters.
Right.
So the Haredi exemption is one that, we understand where it has come from, but it is extremely controversial in Israel today because they're a large
Mm-hmm.
voting bloc, but economically they're a drag,
Mm-hmm.
they're impoverished, and they don't contribute to the national defense.
Right.
So this is leading a lot of Israelis to kind of question why they have it. Allying with the Haredi to make a coalition government. Um, some some parties have done that to stay in power,
Right.
but it's just kicked the can down the road.
Without a
Um,
doubt.
I personally am a big fan of military service as a unifying factor. So I think that military service in the United States has actually gone a long way to reducing extremism and racism in the United States. Because it brings people together, forces them to work toward a common goal who otherwise might not have even met somebody with a different color of their skin. So I personally believe that, okay, I'll caveat this by saying, like, I do avoid trying to comment on the internal politics of other countries, but from what I know about the O's Party's platform and Anna Wilk's idea, I think it's a solid idea.
Without a doubt. I completely agree. And again, most importantly, what we wanted to bring you today is an understanding that, you know, we don't want to rehash the same things over and over again. Not just because we're not, as I said, being invited to Camp David, but because uh, there've got to be new approaches, different ways of understanding these issues. Both George and I come to this with very strong opinions. We understand that. And they don't jive with many of the views that you hear on American news shows, on the radio, from some of our most important and powerful politicians in this country. But there is a certain there's a need for us to be able to say the truth of what's going on. And at the end of the day, we have to recognize that Israel is a country that is committed in word and in deed to democratic values. Does it fail? Absolutely. Does America fail? Absolutely. But that doesn't mean that anybody is spending any time talking about whether America, well, I shouldn't say, there might be a few people who are saying America should be disbanded, but for the most part, there's no real dialogue about the undoing of America. And more importantly, it has been more a force for good in the world than anything else. And at the end of the day, Israel has been more of a force for good in the Middle East than anything else. And I often say this, but it's worth repeating. If you ask your average resident of the Middle East, especially in countries that are not oil producing countries, but even some of those as well, where would you rather live? If you could just, blend in and not have to worry about the politics and all. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be Jerusalem, or more importantly, probably Tel Aviv. So with that, George and I are so glad you joined us. If you are listening to us in Ho Chi Minh City, let us know. We'd love to know. More importantly, we'd actually like to know if you're listening to us at all. Please send us notes. You can post inside of on YouTube, or you can reach us through SoundCloud. But I really just want to say thank you for your viewing us. We're so glad to have you here. And if you don't mind, please do like us and rate us, because it's how others can find us online. George, thank you.
Thanks, Rabbi. Till next time.
Absolutely. Be well.